Hey, welcome back, everyone. So, still on the road. I'm actually broadcasting here from my brother's house, actually, a very nice place out in California. It's a horse ranch. And so, you have to forgive the lighting and such. But yeah, good seeing you all here. I want to go over a bit tonight what's happening with Trump, then go into a few other stories going on. And, good seeing you all. Ethan Allen, yeah, how you doing? Jake Mason, good to see you. Yeah, hi from Georgia. Annette Logue. Hello from Florida, Lizzie. I'll be in Florida soon for CPAC. I'm going to be speaking at CPAC. Actually, I'm on a China panel. And tying into what we're going to be talking about tonight as well, Trump is actually going to be making his first big speech since leaving office in Florida. And so, actually, this coming week now, well, the week we're in, I guess now, we're going to be hearing probably from Trump. Scheduled to speak, probably going to be hearing from Trump. Yeah, Robin Anderson, good seeing you. All right, folks. Again, I have a few stories tonight. If you have questions, please leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. All right, so first off, this is an update. This is Newt Gingrich saying this. He said, nobody can fight him. And he's saying that Trump is virtually untouchable within the Republican Party. This is actually pretty important, I think, when it comes to understanding the changes that have now taken place within the Republican Party. Let me explain. All right, going into it, it says here, former President Donald Trump is virtually untouchable in the Republican Party, even after leaving office last month, said former Republican House Speaker Newt Gingrich. And he said this on a WABC 770 AM in New York on Sunday. He said, quote, what's striking is that President Trump still has such enormous reach in the party that nobody can fight him. You can complain about him, you can criticize him, but McConnell can't possibly fight Trump. He doesn't have a big enough base. Now, Gingrich added that the spat over Trump in the GOP is, quote, also a reminder that there is an establishment insider party that sits around at cocktail parties in Washington. And then there's this huge country outside of Washington. And he said that country in 2015, by about 2-1, did not like the Republican leadership in the Congress. That was the forerunner of us ending up with Trump as a presidential nominee. And he continued, stating McCarthy has been much smarter in the House Republican as the House Republican leader to recognize his ability to get the extra seat to win the House rests almost entirely upon working with Trump, not picking a fight with him. Now, what seems to be the case, and this is analysis, right? Take it for what it is. Trump changed the culture of the Republican Party. The Republican Party today is different than the Republican Party of George Bush. We saw the shakeups happening within the Republican Party, for example. We saw, for example, Bush and Jeb Bush align with Barack Obama and align with the Democrats in the last election. We saw many people who got labeled, many Republicans got labeled as rhinos, Republicans in name only. We even saw a lot of the, quote unquote alt-right actually turn against Trump as things went deeper into his presidency. The Republican Party today is a different party than it was. He changed the internal party. And it seems to be the case with Biden's executive orders. It seems to be the case with what's happening with Mitch McConnell. That really what they're trying to do, it looks like, and this is an analysis. This is, take it for what it's worth again. It seems to be the case that what they're doing inside the Republican Party right now, and with the Democrat Party, with again, Biden, it seems to be the case that they're trying to basically pretend that Trump never happened. They're trying to roll things back. They're trying to bring back the status quo. They're trying to make the Republican Party again the Republican Party before Trump ever happened. They're pretending it never happened, essentially. And at the same time, they're trying to bring back all the different things that Barack Obama had put into place. The problem they're going to have with that is the culture of this country has changed. They don't understand the depth of the Trump effect because voters are aligned with Trump still. And that wasn't just Republican voters. You had plenty of Democrats, plenty of Bernie bros and so on who voted for Trump. Now, what does this mean for the Republican Party going forward? It means they can't get anywhere right now with conservative voters throughout the United States without siding with Trump. And what they're seeing now is that attacking Trump is committing political suicide, as we've seen, for example, with the House members on the Republican side who voted against Trump, voted to impeach Trump, and are now being censured in their own states, right? We see this happening right now across the board. And this is going to be a big deal very soon, because what are we going to see happen? We are going to see Trump make his first big speech this week. And like I've been saying, this was my kind of theory on things. I think Trump was quiet after the election, right? Trump was quiet after leaving office, mainly because they were trying to impeach him. And anything he said or did during that time would have been used against him in the impeachment trials. And that was not a normal trial. That was a trial being done by a political party. That was a political trial, one which had demonstrated bias towards Trump, marches in lockstep, and would not have supported Trump no matter what he did. The other side, the Republicans, Trump has, again, 45-ish on the Republican side who side with him mostly, but not all of them. They tend to not march in lockstep. And we saw as well that in the end, 7 of them voted against him. Trump's only focus, right, between the end of the election and now, his only focus was just on getting past the impeachment, on not turning those 45 Republicans against him. And that's all he had to focus on. There was no victory beyond that at that moment. Now his entire focus has changed. Now his focus is switching very likely towards the movement he started, this MAGA movement, one that is going to be continuing as, again, under the office of the former president, one that is going to be continuing from the grassroots of the United States. And actually, this is important. Now, remember how the Democrats kind of turned things around, how they did it, right? When it comes to the Democratic Party, you actually have 3 different power sectors. There's the old school the old school Democrats, the Clinton family Democrats, that type of Democrat, right? The old school Democrats were the Clinton types. The old school Republicans were the Bush types, right? That's old school Democrats. You have that faction. You also have the Soros faction. If you read, for example, the book The Shadow Party by David Horowitz, he explains how Soros bought control and influence within the Democratic Party. And the third party, being the grassroots, was Freedom Road Socialist Organization, Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, these types of groups. And they worked on community organizing, voter registration drives, getting people to the polls. Some of these groups were behind the BLM riots, so on. They were working on the grassroots. These guys controlled the unions. These guys controlled the grassroots. And then you had the Soros faction controlling putting the candidates into place, right? Putting the different candidates into place across the United States, getting behind their campaigns, pushing them. And then you had the old school Democrats basically within the party, still playing the big business game, still playing the special interest game, same the Republican Party used to be doing. Now, what Trump is going to be doing, based on his own statements, is helping Republicans run for office with the purpose of overturning the House and the Senate in 2022. That is one of his big focuses. The other side of that is engaging on the grassroots. And what does this mean? And the other side is talking to Republicans in power. What does this mean? It means Trump is going to have influence within the top level, at the not executive branch, but at the top level, within the, political power base, right? Within that political power base, Trump is going to have influence. Within that middle level, that Soros type level of placing candidates, getting behind their campaigns, financing and supporting them, Trump is going to be playing a significant role. And when it comes to that grassroots level, the one that DSA and Democratic Socialists of America, again, and Freedom Road Socialist Organization, the role that they play, grassroots, Trump is going to be on that as well. And so what does this mean? Trump is going to be hitting all 3 levels when it comes to activism, when it comes to getting people out, when it comes to motivating people. He's going to be hitting all 3 significant levels that need to be worked on in order to move things politically. And this is going to be a big shift culturally. Now, presidents can change the culture of countries. We saw Barack Obama do it. Really, a lot of the race narratives only started under Barack Obama. BLM started, a lot of the transgender movement stuff started. A lot of that was Obama-type cultural change that he introduced to the United States. He changed the culture. Trump came in again and he started this we the people type movement. This idea of making America great again. This idea of government caring about their citizens, caring about jobs, caring about economy, and helping people by relinquishing some of the powers of government and giving some of that power back to the people. He started this change within government. And as Biden rolls back those powers, people are going to feel the pain of losing the powers that were given to them through that system. What does this mean now, right? What does this mean now that Trump is engaged on that? Well, when Trump was president, a lot of his supporting base was more cheerleading. You know, that's our president. He's fighting for us. This was the mentality, right? You know, this is our president. Support him. You know, cheerlead him, support him, show that you care what he's doing. That was the focus of the Trump base. That is not getting people out in the streets. That is not getting people active. That is not political activism. That is not grassroots activism. That is not community organizing. That is not putting politicians into places of, running positions across the country. It is none of those things. It is merely top down, focused on the executive branch, working on that level. Trump is now, he's been at that level. Now he's going to the other levels. And when it hits those other levels is when you start having really fundamental changes within a country. And this is what we're going to be seeing very likely starting this week when President Trump, or former President Trump, speaks at CCP. This is very likely going to be the launch of this movement. And as I mentioned before, keep in mind, we mentioned the rumors that Trump was talking about starting a social media. There have been some updates on that. He is now talking about starting a social media again, suggesting he's not getting on Parler, which he might still have to see, because even before he got banned on Facebook and so on, he was on multiple platforms, even though Twitter was the biggest. He still had YouTube, he still had Twitter, he still had Facebook, he was still on all of them. Maybe he's talking about launching his own platform. Maybe he'll get on Parler as well. We'll have to see. But what does that mean? Because of cancel culture, because of the way that the attention Trump brings, because of the way that businesses will get attacked for hosting someone on their platform who has that much negative attention from that political faction, it's very difficult for Trump to use a platform unless it is a secure platform, meaning that just launching a platform, just launching a website is not enough. In order to launch a social media platform, and allegedly he's already raised millions, has millions behind it to move and do it, right? In addition to launching that, he would need to build the infrastructure. He would need the cloud services. He would need the DNS service, which basically serves the website, make sure it gets to people's computers and smartphones. And he would need as well to develop the platform and have it be secure enough so people are going to attack on it. Meaning that Trump is very likely going to create not just a surface platform, but infrastructure to support that platform. And they are now talking about doing this. And in order to do what he wants to do, stated publicly, under his office of the former president, as he's calling it, and Melania Trump has hers as well, office of Melania Trump, they're going to be using these for what he calls community organizing, right? Some term really from like Saul Alinsky, right? Rules for Radicals. A type of grassroots activism that you typically only see involvement in from the far left, Barack Obama types, right? Saul Alinsky, Barack Obama, community organizers. Trump is going to be engaging on that, which means he needs to communicate with people, which means he needs to organize people, which means people are going to need to have their own chat rooms to be able to organize around the movement that he's starting. And so very likely we're going to start seeing a lot more movement around these. Now let's go another story, and then I'll go into some questions in just a bit. All right, next story up here. This is Epoch Times again. It says Manhattan DA subpoenas tax agency in criminal probe into Trump organization. What does this mean? They're still attacking Trump. And what does that mean? They're still afraid of Trump. They're concerned, it seems, about the influence he can still have within the United States. And they're using everything they can, it seems, in order to stop him from getting that influence, from keeping that influence, from re-engaging the 74 million Americans, at the very least, who supported him, who voted for him, and who very likely, many of whom still support him. They do not want him to re-engage those individuals, get them active, and start moving them in one focused direction, right? Because, they call it in, movements like leadership capitation. When you remove the leader of a movement, what happens to it? It's like taking your finger and running it through a line of ants. They lose the scent trail, they go all over the place. Done, right? If they can maintain that state, they can reestablish order, reestablish control, and try to redirect all that public sentiment and public attention to what they want them to be focused on. That does not work if Trump comes back onto the scene. And again, this seems to be what they're afraid of happening right now. Let's go into this, all right? Yeah, someone's mentioning A, B, and X said Trump to kingmaker. That's right. Kingmakers. That is what Trump is going to be doing as we move forward to 2022. All right. Drink tonight, by the way, is iced coffee because it's only 7:30 here on the West Coast. All right, let's go into this. It says here, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office has subpoenaed a New York City property tax agency as part of a criminal probe into one of former President Donald Trump's companies. It says New York City Tax Commission was issued the subpoena. The agency's president, Frances Henn, confirmed to Reuters on Friday. The move suggests that Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance Jr. is examining the values Trump assigned to some commercial properties in tax filings and loan documents and looking for possible evidence of fraud. Vance's office and lawyers for the Trump Organization declined requests from Reuters to comment on the tax commission subpoenas. Now, citing grand jury secrecy rules, Vance's office has not publicly said what it is investigating, but some details have emerged in court filings that suggest, not proven, but suggest, prosecutors are seeking evidence of possible falsification of records, as well as insurance and tax fraud. Now, Vance's office sent subpoenas to local governments in the New York City suburbs last month, seeking information about a Westchester estate that Trump owns there and 158 acres of land he donated to a conservation land trust in order to qualify for an income tax reduction. And earlier this week, Vance's office added Mark Pomerantz, a prominent former prosecutor, added to their team to bolster its team investigating possible fraud claims against Trump's company. According to Danny Frost, a spokesperson for the office, CNN reported. Now, in addition to this, New York Attorney General Leisha James, a Democrat, is conducting a civil probe into whether the Trump Organization improperly manipulated the value of Trump's assets on annual financial statements in order to secure loans and obtain tax benefits. In other words, doing things that most wealthy people in this country do. How much tax money, for example, does Mark Zuckerberg pay, right? How much tax money does the head of Twitter pay? Usually these companies don't pay much in taxes because there's all kinds of loopholes within the tax system that people take advantage of. And Trump has publicly said this much. He said, of course we take advantage of it. He does it as well. Everyone does it because within legal bounds, you can do that. And it's not illegal, but you could argue that it's not really ethical because you're kind of gaming the tax system. But it's how things work in this country, unfortunately. Now, what you're really seeing here, though, is attempts to take down Trump, to prevent him from taking up the role that they're afraid he's going to take up. Now, it would serve their interest, technically, to make sure that he never runs for president again, to make sure that he's not able to re-engage his former support base ever again, to make sure that he can't organize people, to make sure that he's not putting different politicians into place and pushing their campaigns to help them get into office. It is in their interest to prevent this from happening because it challenges the powers that they have established. And without Trump on the scene, what is the Republican Party, as we just now talked about, according to Newt Gingrich? The Republican Party is the Republican Party of the George Bush era without Trump. And it seems to be the case again that they're trying to bring back the status quo, bring things back to the way they were before. And it's not likely they're going to succeed at it. They've been going after his taxes for the past 4.5 years. They've been going after him with everything they could, investigating everything they could, going after every single layer they could possibly find, trying to get him out of office, trying to impeach him, trying to incriminate him, and nothing stuck. And so we'll have to see what happens from here, but it seems to be the case again that they're just continuing on this trajectory that they've always been on. And one which again suggests something important. It suggests that they're afraid of what Trump can do, afraid of the public attention he can capture, afraid of the impact that that can have on the systems that they have built. All right, let's go over some questions, folks. This is let's see, this is from Jersey Optometrist. He said, President Trump is closing speaker at CPAC in Orlando this weekend. What do you think will be on his agenda? So again, I'm going to be at CPAC. I'll be there doing interviews, and I'm also scheduled to speak on a panel about China. So anyone who's there, come say hi. In terms of what Trump's very likely going to have on his agenda, pure speculation, but I would believe that very likely on his agenda is going to be his next moves, because he's been making some public statements about what his next moves will be. He announced this office of the former president. And again, that's an interesting, right? That is an interesting statement, office of the former president. It's kind of like he's invoking the image of a president. He's invoking that image, and he's calling it an office, right? An office, not a movement, not a nonprofit, not a foundation. What does that mean? Trump is setting himself up with the persona, not with the public, statement as such. He's calling it former president, but with the persona of a government in exile. He is establishing himself as a remaining player, a key player within the U.S. political system. Office of the former president, right? That is his focus. And through this, again, he is going to be working as a kingmaker. He is going to be working to help people get into positions of power. Ironically, doing the same thing that George Soros has been doing, since before the Clinton era. And ironically, when he engages with political organizing, grassroots organizing, engaging in the same thing that DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, again, Freedom Road Socialist Organization, these organizations have been playing from the grassroots as well. Challenging, really, that's where the narratives happen. That is where the public interpretation of politics happens. That is where people start believing race narratives. That is where people start believing gender narratives. That is where people start believing all the narratives that are used to justify handing over our rights and our constitutionally protected rights over to the government, believing that the government somehow knows better than we do. And every time you do that, with every regulation, the bar between freedom and socialism slides further and further left. The bar between individual liberty, between your ability to decide how you live your life, what you say, what you believe, what you choose to do with your life, that bar swings from that more towards government control with everything that they pass, with every law they pass. And Trump, by engaging that, is going to be working on the public perception level, grassroots organizing, calls it community organizing, and pushing politicians who represent that message to keep that discussion alive in this country, meaning foundational cultural change in this country that came from the top, right? A message that came from the top, now coming up from the bottom to meet it. This is going to be what happens over the next couple of years, and very likely, I believe, based on Trump's, based on the little bit of movement we've been seeing already, I believe this is what Trump is going to be announcing when he speaks to CPAC. I'll keep you updated. I will be at CPAC, so I'll be reporting there. And so, of course, I'll keep you all updated with that. All right, this is from Brian Kuhn. He said, hey, Josh, any updates on the election lawsuit or Linwood submitting evidence against John Roberts? I did see some updates in Arizona that the state legislature seems to have gotten some green lights with moving forward with their audit. And this is going to make Maricopa, allegedly, this could put a few people behind bars in Maricopa County, because even on the surface, they violated some laws. We'll have to see what happens with it. We'll have to see how it plays out. But important note when it comes to Arizona, Maricopa County, where you had a lot of the allegations of fraud taking place, they're going to be doing their own audit. That audit very likely is going to be the one that all the media report on, because as people have noted, it is not a complete audit. It omits key areas of investigation that are needed to really deal with the allegations of fraud, right? If they do not address those areas, they're not actually addressing the real issues. And so they could say, yes, we did the audit, no evidence of fraud, nothing to see here, nothing to see. It was all a bunch of right-wing conspiracies meant to launch an insurrection in this country. Don't pay attention to them, and not only don't pay attention to them, but those are terrorists, they're right-wing extremists. Don't listen to them. They can push that narrative by doing an incomplete investigation and making it appear that that was a complete investigation. That is now under assault by what's happening at the state legislature level in Arizona, because the state legislature is now pushing its own investigation. The state Senate's pushing their own investigation. They are apparently moving forward with that. And what's going to be very, very interesting with that is, first off, the two competing narratives, Maricopa County versus state Senate. There's that. Argue of an incomplete investigation versus very likely very thorough investigation. There's that. But you're also going to have the issue now that if Maricopa County moves forward with their audit, right? If Maricopa County moves forward with their audit and they say no fraud, nothing to see here, no evidence, nothing to see here, that serves their narrative interest. But for the people conducting that investigation, that is possibly something that could incriminate them. And here's why. Because if they conduct their audit and they said, oh, we finished it, we completed it, we have found no evidence of this and that, when the state Senate does their own investigation, the findings, right? The findings of the state Senate could demonstrate areas that they failed to investigate, areas they overlooked, areas that they may have committed fraud with their own investigation, and releasing that information in a way that misleads the public. That alone could actually get a lot of them in trouble. And especially if some of the individuals who are behind the audit taking place in Maricopa County are found to have violated the law, then their role in influencing this audit taking place in Maricopa County could work as additional evidence to incriminate them. Because not only would you have a crime that took place, you would have an attempt of a cover-up that took place. I think that'd be a very significant thing to watch that is playing out. When it comes to the lawsuits still in place, for example, through Linwood, through Sidney Powell, through Trump, these are still set to be heard by the Supreme Court, which a lot of people haven't talked about. The Supreme Court is still scheduled to hear these, yes, but nobody's talking about it. Very likely, I would, and there's been no updates that I've heard yet on this. I should note, because it's Richie asked. I have not heard any updates yet. But one thing to note that's very important is that very likely one of the big reasons they're not being public on it, you hear no statements on it, because anything they say at this point can be and very likely will be used against them by not just the mainstream media, but very likely by organizations looking to prevent those lawsuits from happening. We saw what they did to Linwood. Right? We saw what they did to Linwood. They're trying to disbar him. He has a Supreme Court case scheduled to be heard, and they're trying to take away his license as a lawyer. They're trying to disbar him, meaning that what they're doing, whether intentional or not, is they're interfering in his ability to bring this case to the Supreme Court, which it is scheduled to hear. Right? Anything they say at this point can lead to an outcome like that. The same thing they're doing to Mike Lindell, right? The pillow guy. Same thing they're doing to him. He released these documentaries demonstrating some of the evidence he's collected when it comes to allegations of fraud. And you can watch his documentaries and make your own conclusions on them. They're fairly long, but they're worth hearing. Same thing they're doing to him. They're trying to cancel him, trying to shut him down, trying to make sure that nobody can hear what he has to say. Because as long as they can make sure that these people cannot act, if they can make it so that, if they speak, that they're threatened with billion-dollar lawsuits, if they can make it so that even discussing these things is considered a crime, then they can do everything they can to silence these people, to pressure them to be silent. And even if things do turn around, to convince enough people in the United States that this is some kind of, far-right coup, essentially, that's being launched. And so this is very likely where things are heading with that. And again, I'll keep y'all updated with the lawsuits as they play out and with the investigations as they play out. Let's see here. This is from Oh, and you asked also about Linwood submitting evidence against John Roberts. I have not heard any additional evidence on that. Linwood was making pretty serious allegations against Chief Justice John Roberts, including around, sex crimes and stuff like that. Have not heard any updates on that. If we do, we can give you all updates. We'll be letting you know. I'll do one more question, then I'll go into some more stories for the night. It's from Jung Suk. He said, Jung Suk Moon. He said, Josh, please talk about Texas. Yeah, the situation in Texas is still pretty serious. Again, you had big power outages during a very strong cold spell. And, again, I was in Texas right before that hit. I got out of Texas. I mean, I didn't know it was coming. I got out of Texas by about a week and missed that all by about a week. You had rolling blackouts hit Texas. And there's a lot of speculation now on what caused that. Some people are saying that it's because they went to green energy and, the windmills and stuff like that basically got frozen, shut down, were not enough to power the country. People are also pointing, though, that, hey, why, if these things failed in Texas, why other areas where you have freezing cold temperatures, why are you not having the same kinds of issues in those areas, right? There's a lot of speculation. I've heard speculation and calls for investigation to possible cyber attacks. Maybe China was involved. There's a lot of funny business going on. Anything at this point is speculation, and so we'll have to see what comes out of it. I can tell you, though, there's going to be a few big issues that come out from this. One is going to be, of course, 70 people apparently having died from this, people dying from hypothermia and car accidents and things like this. One of the big things that nobody's talking about and very likely will not talk about. Remember that you have freezing weather in Texas, about 10 degrees, right? Freezing cold, enough to kill people. People are dying from hypothermia. People who have been stuck outside are dying from hypothermia in Texas, 10-degree weather. Now, one big thing to consider, remember how there was that migrant caravan heading for that area? Remember the news about this huge migrant caravan, thousands of people heading for the border because Biden came out and announced, free healthcare, free services. Maybe even you'll get a stimulus package when the American people are being denied a COVID stimulus package. That now they're saying maybe your average American earning, as a family earning more than $75,000 does not deserve to get a bailout package from the government for the virus because of the lockdowns. That the real people in need are non-citizens, as they're calling them now, people who've come to this country illegally and immigrated illegally. Remember how they lured them into the country by making these statements and encouraged them to immigrate illegally into this country by saying that? Where are those people? How many of them were in the desert heading towards Texas when this cold spell hit, under which people caught outside are dying from hypothermia? How many people who were in the desert trying to illegally immigrate because they were encouraged by government policy in the United States have died in the desert because of that? This is going to be something to consider. Where are these migrant caravans that were heading here? How many people were trying to illegally immigrate during that time because of government statements and are now at serious risk at the very least, right, on the U.S.-Texas border, or may have been caught out in the cold and who knows what have happened to them? That is going to be something that needs to be investigated, right? It's going to be hard to get any numbers on it because oftentimes you'll find that a lot of people working in Border Patrol, police department, even military don't want to talk about the things they deal with because they risk putting their jobs at risk and they risk personal attacks, including by the media. In fact, I can tell you some stories I've heard personally. I know, for example, out here in California, people in the police department, one individual, pretty high ranked, will not speak on record, but actually through his work as a police officer, actually investigated and uncovered a human trafficking ring, a very large one, involving illegal aliens and also involving people being held against their will. People held against their will. What does that mean, right? Human trafficking, and not just, coyotes and snakeheads. People taking money to engage in this business of human trafficking, but people holding people against their will through the process of human trafficking, like slave type stuff, right? This individual exposed this, but because this individual alerted Border Patrol when he discovered this, he was attacked by his own department. And this is the kind of stuff these people face when they reveal crimes that take place like this, when they do their jobs that they are tasked with doing, but because the political correct environment does not support certain truths from being spoken, even when those truths involve human trafficking, slave labor, and murder, even when they involve those things. Because why is that? It hurts the political interest. It is something that defends, supports, and exposes the abuse of human rights, right? Defends the abuse, right? Defends the people going after these things, right? Gives power to people trying to stop these things from happening. That exposes them, that brings public attention to them, right? That's a good thing, even according to very far left political narratives, right? They tend to care about human life. They tend to be more humanitarian. You would think they would care about this. But because it goes against the political interest, this type of speech is not allowed. Even exposing crimes where people are being held against their will and trafficked against their will, exposing that is something that will get you attacked. And so you're going to see what is very likely, at the very least, a humanitarian crisis posing a risk to people trying to illegally cross into the United States right now. At the very least, what should be a humanitarian crisis for people putting their lives at risk trying to make that cross because government officials in the United States are encouraging them to do so. Really, you're going to see this whole thing swept under the rug. This is a huge issue that is very likely just going to get swept under the rug. Let's see here real quick. This is from Teresa. He said, Josh, what about the vaccine? Well, not to see with the COVID vaccine. I do have an update on the vaccine industry I want to get into. Actually, there's a nonprofit right now suing the vaccine industry suing the CDC, I believe it is, over allegations that vaccines do not cause autism. So it's going to be interesting to watch a lawsuit actually come about against the CDC, bringing forward evidence over something that's oftentimes called conspiracy theory. I have to see what comes forward in it. I'll go into that in just a minute because I want to go over a few other stories first. All right, so first off, I want to go over this. This is from Cash Patel. He says, Biden's stance on CCP, Chinese Communist Party's Uyghur genocide, is a, quote, serious threat to the world. And this is going to be interesting, right? This is going to be interesting because this not only talks about Chinese genocide, not only talks about Biden's stance on the CCP, it also talks about something that's going to severely impact the state of global politics and the influence the United States has as the world leader. Really, hear me out on this. We are about to see, depending on how Biden positions himself in China, we are about to see a major, major shift in terms of U.S. global influence, in terms of U.S. policy and U.S. diplomacy. We are going to see a major, major shift in this in East Asia and the Asia-Pacific region, including Australia and Europe and in Canada as well, if Biden does not explain it, if Biden does not take the right position on this. Let me explain. Let me go on this just a bit. All right, it says here, President Biden's recent comments describing the Uyghur genocide in China. These are the Muslim Uyghurs, the ones being held as slaves, used for slave labor, and also having their organs harvested, just like Falun Gong practitioners and just like other religious believers in China, right? These are the individuals who, again, the persecution in China was declared a genocide, right? This is what happened. It says President Joe Biden's recent comments describing the Uyghur genocide in China as a matter of different cultural norms, which is what he said, and are allowing, quote, outrageous conduct to continue and pose a, quote, serious threat to the world. And that's according to former Department of Defense Chief of Staff Kash Patel during an interview on February 21st. And he said this, telling it to Fox News. He said, quote, they are in genocide in China against the Uyghurs, a genocide against the Uyghurs in China. That is factually not in dispute. And for the leader of the free world, the United States President, Joe Biden at this time, to say that genocide is a cultural norm is outrageous. Could you imagine if President Trump said publicly that the Uyghur genocide in China, which everyone acknowledges, is a cultural norm? It would have been a global calamity. But because the left-wing media allows the politicization of our national security to continue just because Joe Biden said it, it allows for this outrageous conduct. Now, during a CNN town hall on February 16th, Biden described his 2-hour phone call with Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping, right? Biden appeared to rationalize Xi Jinping's actions by suggesting that China has historically been victimized by outside forces when it wasn't unified within. And this is ridiculous. This is the kind of narrative the CCP pushes. This is the lie the Chinese Communist Party tells to the world, tells to its own people to justify its abusive and genocidal practices. This is the narrative the Chinese Communist Party uses to justify genocide. And Biden is continuing stating that same justification of genocide, right? Genocide of Muslim Uyghurs, the same group that the Democrats were claiming to protect, Muslims, right? The same people who you have all these race politics in Europe trying to protect. And here's Biden defending a government committing genocide against these people. Let me explain this. Biden said this. This is Biden's direct quote from that interview. He says, if you know anything about Chinese history, this is ridiculous for those who actually know Chinese history. If you know anything about Chinese history, it has always been the time when China has been victimized by the outer world is when they haven't been unified at home. The central principle of Xi Jinping is that there must be a united, tightly controlled China, and he uses his rationale for the things he does based on that. And Biden said he made it clear to Xi Jinping that he must speak up about human rights, and Xi said he gets it. But Biden then said, culturally, there are different norms that each country and their leaders are expected to follow. And it's unclear whether Biden was referring to himself or Xi when he spoke about the different norms, right? The statement drew criticism because Biden appeared to not take issue with genocide being a norm in China. Now, I won't go too deep. I won't go deeper into this article, but let me explain the significance of this. Look, like him or hate him, Trump changed the international image of the Chinese Communist Party, right? A lot of countries have changed their positions on China. This includes Europe. This includes Canada to some extent. Right? Now, the top leaders, it's iffy, but a lot of people in Canada to some extent. It includes Japan. It includes Mongolia. It includes Vietnam. It includes India. It includes the UK. It includes Australia, the Philippines, different countries in that entire Asia-Pacific region, different countries across Europe, and even many countries throughout Latin America and even in Africa. And even in countries where politics has not shifted towards China, you've seen a grassroots coming of awareness of the genocides and human rights abuses taking place in China. Things that used to be niche, things that I was talking about, right? Chinese subversion, Chinese Communist Party's use of organ harvesting, things that were niche topics when it comes to the abuses taking place in China. These were not widely known before. They were not mainstream topics. You had some folks like myself exposing these things for years. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, it was not a mainstream topic. I was considered a niche journalist trying to warn the world about this stuff, right? And a lot of people didn't even believe it. In fact, you try to talk to people who work in, think tanks and stuff like that. A lot of them didn't even want to hear it because a lot of them were very close to the Chinese Communist Party. And lo and behold, a lot of them are taking money for the Chinese Communist Party, right? A lot of this has now become public knowledge. And let's go into this a bit more, right? What happened in Australia? They called for investigations into the origin of the virus, and the Chinese Communist Party attacked them. The Chinese Communist Party threatened them. The Chinese Communist Party cut off trade deals with them, right? They attacked them. That turned the situation around in Australia. With Japan, they criticized them as well. With South Korea as well, they had some breakage, although the government there is getting closer to the CCP as well. You had in Vietnam a new revitalization of these efforts against the Chinese Communist Party. In the Philippines, you saw a shift again, where Duterte had kind of leaned more towards China, then towards the US, then back towards China, and now pushing back again against the CCP because of its aggressive actions in the South China Sea. You saw India, Japan, and Australia join this Quad alliance with the United States against the Chinese Communist Party. And you saw in Europe, the different government officials, including Angela Merkel in Germany, taking a stronger stance, calling out the Chinese Communist Party, one, for what's happening with the virus, two, for the Chinese Communist Party's aggressive stance, where they said the friendly mask the Chinese Communist Party used to wear has now fallen off, right? Criticizing them on this. And then when the Chinese Communist Party was exposed to be doing these different types of abusive practices, right? Genocide, forced labor, slave labor, when every country in the world is trying to condemn slavery and racism and racial suppression and religious suppression, these things were called out and exposed in China. And the same people who claim to support these narratives now in the United States are shifting the whole thing and saying this is a cultural difference, essentially. What do you think the impact is going to be if the United States changes what Trump started, exposing these things? What's going to happen if Biden, the companies in China that are sanctioned because they're involved in an act of genocide against a religious group in China, Muslims in this case, and not just a religious group, right? Not just a religious group in China, but a persecuted minority of people who claim to support religious minorities and supporting minorities of all kinds and getting behind persecuted faiths. Same people making these narratives, pulling away these sanctions. What do you think is going to happen? On top of this, what's going to happen if Biden removes the sanctions on these different Chinese companies that were involved in the building of artificial islands and so on in the South China Sea? A lot of big Chinese companies. He is going to alienate Japan, Australia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and India. Right? If he does that, he's going to alienate the entire Asia Pacific region against the United States. And they're not going to change their position on China. He's going to alienate Taiwan. Right? If he changes that one set of sanctions, he's going to alienate all these countries. If he gets rid of this genocide declaration and gets rid of the sanctions on different countries that were different companies that were involved in genocide, still are, what's going to happen? All of Europe, all these countries in Europe and Canada that have also agreed this is genocide and they oppose it, are going to be very unhappy with the United States. And very likely they're going to continue calling out the Chinese Communist Party for its act of genocide. Because, these are true believers. You can say they're far left, which they kind of are. Well, they are. But they believe in it. They actually believe the narratives, right? They actually do oppose this type of persecution. They're not going to align with the United States if the United States changes that position, right? They're not going to change that. And then what happens as well, right? What happens as well if Biden removes the sanctions on Hong Kong officials who were involved in the forceful takeover of Hong Kong by the Chinese Communist Party, the tossing out of this agreement? You're going to alienate every one of the countries that were part of the British Empire, right? The UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and any other country that condemned the actions that took place under the Chinese Communist Party against Hong Kong. Biden, right now, we'll see what the context of this is and how he positions himself going forward. But if he changes these sanctions on the Chinese Communist Party, if he reverses these policies, he is going to alienate the United States diplomatically from all of these different countries. All of these different countries that can recognize the abuses taking place in China are going to be alienated from U.S. influence. Meaning, what? The United States is very likely going to lose, to a large degree, the recognition as being a world leader among these countries, because the politics that they see him doing go against the values that they have come to believe in. And that will call into question a lot of the actions now taking place in the U.S., whether it's Pelosi starting up this commission, 9/11 style commission to investigate political enemies, right, who are involved in the Capitol siege, whether it's different law enforcement bodies like in New York going after the former president of the United States, whether it's platforms in the United States, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, so on, silencing people because they don't believe what their political stance is. When we already see in countries like Poland, we see countries like Australia, actions pushing back against this, even in Germany and the UK and so on. Even in Brazil, which, you might remember we've had on Lando Santos, who runs the media Terceira Livre. A media that the Brazilian politicians most don't like because it's pro-Bolsonaro. YouTube shut down his channel. What happened? The Brazilian Supreme Court ruled in his favor against YouTube, and they have to restore his channel. Brazil has better standards on free speech right now than the United States does. Right? Let that sink in. What is going to happen if this trajectory continues when it comes to the U.S. image on the global stage? You're going to be seeing a lot of pushback against the United States. Now, let me go over a couple more stories because I want to get into what happened with these vaccines. First, I want to talk about Fauci real briefly. Now, who remembers how long the lockdowns were going to last? You remember, what was it, 3 weeks to stop the spread? Remember 3 weeks to stop the spread? How many 3 weeks now are we into this virus? Wear a mask. Now it's what, 2 masks, 3 masks? How many masks are we at now? When it came to, for example, temporary lockdowns to, take some temporary loss and, save the country, save lives. How many months are we in right now with these lockdowns? What's happening now? We're not seeing an end to this in sight. Fauci is now saying it's possible. Americans still need to wear masks in 2022. Biden is now saying this could last until Christmas. And what are they doing as they do this? They're passing laws right now, including through COVID relief packages, that give them more government power, things totally unrelated to anything around the virus. For example, millions upon millions of dollars for California to build new rail programs. Millions upon millions of dollars to foreign countries for things absolutely unrelated to the virus. Millions upon millions of dollars with these COVID relief payments that were supposed to go to the American people, now being given to non-citizens, being encouraged to illegally immigrate to the United States under these policies. What we're seeing right now is government having expanded its power. And what is a typical situation when we have expansion of government power, right? How often do you see government and business? Let's start with government. How often do you see government expanding its powers and then relinquishing these powers, right? Well, that's what Europe did after World War II, when the British government, for example, expanded its powers for the war. They were criticized for not relinquishing them. And by not relinquishing the expanded powers they gave themselves during World War II, right? By not relinquishing those powers, what happened? Well, they brought in more socialist policies. They used to advance a socialist agenda. When it comes to them creating new policies to give themselves new political powers, how do they normally get rid of them? They regulate new elements within the laws to try to fix things. In other words, they add stacks of paper to it rather than take stacks away from it. And that is typically how they do things. So what's going to happen? The chances of them getting rid of the powers and policies they've now established are slim to none. What is going to happen very likely in terms of the way they've acted in the past, whenever it comes to legislation, is they're going to put new legislation on top of it that retain the ability to use the powers they have now given themselves, while creating different stipulations that grant to the American people through law, not through natural rights, that grant to the American people through law the ability to have freedom that you earn, right? The idea that it is something given to you, not something that you naturally have, right? If they give back freedom to us with this lockdowns, if they give back freedom not through relinquishing of power, but through the adding of legislation to stipulate that you can have freedom of movement if you get the virus vaccine, that you can have freedom of movement if, for example, you agree to certain stipulations or certain requirements, that means that they are not actually removing power. That means they're keeping the powers in place and then creating requirements you have to meet to enjoy freedom, right? Which is what they have in China, which is what they have under the Chinese Communist Party's social credit system. It is the exact same type of government, and the control that they have through that, again, is something that they're very unlikely to relinquish, because in history, we almost never see them relinquish control. Now, in addition to this, you have businesses getting involved in this as well. businesses that are developing technologies, developing deals, developing ties for the sake of, again, supporting these different types of government actions, supporting these new types of policies, supporting these new types of public concerns. How often is it that businesses invest millions upon millions of dollars to develop new technologies and then shut them off and throw them in the trash? What do you think they're going to do with these new technologies that allow them to do things like contact tracing, to do things like monitoring people, to do things like collecting new data on people? Do you think they're going to take those systems they built, those technologies they built, seal them up, toss them in the trash, never look at them again? Or do you think they're going to take that information and sell it to advertisers, sell it to governments, use it to create new platforms and new technologies, to very likely create partnerships with government to expand on these different monitoring programs they've now put into place for the sake of giving people, based on their actions, based on their choices, based on the way they adhere to government policy, the freedoms that they've taken away from us, right? I would say, based on the way we typically see business and government operate, the latter of those two is the more likely. Or the keeping of power is the more likely. All right, let me go over one more story, then I'll go over a few questions. All right, this is Epoch Times. It says here about the virus, about the vaccines, not the virus vaccine per se. All right, hear me out. It says here, nonprofit to file lawsuit against CDC over statement that vaccines do not cause autism. Let's hear it out, right? It says, Del Bigtree, founder of the Informed Consent Action Network, ICANN, said his organization will file a lawsuit against the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, to request the federal agency to take down its statement that claims vaccines do not cause autism from its website on autism and vaccines. Now, Bigtree told the Epoch Times, quote, there is no science to back up the statement as far as what the CDC has provided to say that vaccines, plural, do not cause autism. This is a false statement. We will bring a case against the CDC to remove that from the website because it is actually inaccurate. Bigtree says that the CDC has not been able to provide his organization studies that concretely show vaccines given to infants in the first 6 months of life do not cause autism, a neurological and developmental disorder that may be diagnosed as early as 6 to 12 months. And Bigtree said, quote, if vaccines contribute to the issue, certainly we can isolate it inside of the vaccines given in the first 6 months of life because autism is appearing at 6 months. Now, the United States has seen an increase in children diagnosed with autism. In 2000, there were only 1 in 150 children with autism. By 2016, CDC estimated that 1 in 45 children had autism, with 1 in 32 children diagnosed in New Jersey. A spokesperson from the CDC said the health agency has always been upfront about its position on vaccines and autism, and said it in an email to the Epoch Times, CDC is and has always been clear on this subject. Vaccines do not cause autism. Now, we'll have to see what happens with this. I know vaccines are one of those issues that people on the right and the left typically are all over the place on. There are plenty of people on the right who believe vaccines are fine and, have no issue with them. There are plenty of people on the left who feel the same way. And there are plenty of people on both sides who say, beware of them, don't trust them, so on, right? We won't get into that argument. But what's interesting here is that this is calling out the CDC for making statements that it may not have science to prove, meaning that if they remove this statement, it does demonstrate that very likely they did not have the scientific basis to make that statement, and meaning that they may have not actually done the required research to make that statement. And what does that mean going forward? Well, we'll have to see. We'll have to see whether this means, of course, maybe investigations will be done into possible causes of autism, and maybe investigations will be done in order for them to make statements of safety if they're doing research on it. That if they're going to make statements of safety of these things, that they need to be able to demonstrate it before making those statements. Now, we'll have to see what comes out of this. Again, we'll keep you updated as we have information come out. All right, let me go over just a couple questions because it's getting a bit late. Let's see here. This is from Amanda Kasser. He said, Josh, I know it's mostly Uyghurs, but is the CCP torturing Christians too? Yes, the Chinese Communist Party brutally persecutes not just Muslim Uyghurs, but also Falun Gong practitioners, Tibetan Buddhists, and house Christians. And I mean, I wrote a story, several years ago now, pretty much saying this was going to happen, because the number of Christians in China hit about 100 million. And when Falun Gong hit 100 million, that's when the Chinese Communist Party set out to annihilate them. Because once you hit a big enough number, that is when you start posing a threat to the regime. That is when your very existence, right, your beliefs, start posing a threat to the regime in power. In China, at least. That's about one of every 15-ish Chinese people. And basically what the Chinese Communist Party did with Christianity is they, during the Cultural Revolution, killed priests, killed preachers, killed the people who could make arguments for the religion, and then put into power their own people, right? They did this to Buddhism, they did this to Taoism, they did this to Christianity. Under Buddhism, they established, for example, the China Buddha Association, which created a state-run version of the religion that eliminated the parts of the religion that the CCP deemed were antithetical to the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. They did the same thing to Christianity. They did the same thing as well, right? They did the same thing as well to the Catholic Church, which is why you have Christians and Catholics in China who do not follow the system and have to worship on their own. You call these people house Christians. Now, why do they do this real quickly? It's because in China, right, under communism in general, why does any communist regime tend to always target religious believers? It's because when you believe in religion, you believe in a morality and power higher than government. And as long as you believe in a morality and power higher than government, you have a basis to assess the actions and the moral actions of the people in power. As long as you believe there's a power higher than government, then you have a higher standard through which to judge the actions of the government. As long as you believe in morality outside of what the government does, it means you have a basis of judgment that is outside of government power. And this is different from what the Chinese Communist Party pushes. This is different from what they call political correctness. And political correctness goes back to 1967 Mao Zedong. And the idea was this. The idea was that if you support government action, whatever the policy may be, you are politically correct. And if you oppose it, you are not politically correct and you are an enemy of the state. And the idea at the time was in China, for example, right? In China, for example, during the Cultural Revolution, they said kill your landlord, persecute your teachers, right? That was politically correct, right? Killing your landlord was politically correct in China. During the Bolshevik Revolution, killing the wealthy peasants was politically correct. During the Khmer Rouge, killing the educated class was politically correct. Under Hitler, killing the Jews was politically correct, according to the politics at that time. And the problem with this is that if you only follow government action, if there's no higher standard through which to judge the morals of government action, then the only basis of morality is government action, right? Anything the government does then is considered the basis of morality. What the government does is always right under that belief. And if people believe in a power higher than government, that is a threat to everything they do. And it is for this reason that totalitarian regimes will always try to destroy religion, because as long as people believe in religion, they have a standard through which they can look at what the government is doing and say, this is unethical. And so this is why they're persecuting Christians in China. This is why they're doing what they're doing. And yes, they're doing it on a large scale. Not only are they doing it right now, but they're actually there's a website you all might be interested in. It's called Bitter Winter. I think it's run by house Christians. I could be wrong, or Christians. I could be wrong, but it's very good. It's called Bitter Winter. They report a lot on religious persecution in China. And one of the big things you see happening right now, not only are they persecuting Christians, and I mean, it's good the world is recognizing the persecution of Muslim Uyghurs, but they should be calling out the persecution of Tibetans. They should be calling out the persecution of house Christians. They should be calling out the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners, and they should be calling out the persecution of the people of Inner Mongolia, because they're all being persecuted just like this, including Hong Kong as well, and what the Chinese Communist Party wants to do to democracy activists and so on. But one thing they're talking about right now is not only are they doing this, not only are they persecuting them, they're also going to temples right now and they're replacing them. They're putting in the place of Jesus and Mary and Buddha, they're putting in their place statues of Mao Zedong and Mao Zedong's wife and of CCP officials. They are bringing back government worship. And yeah, you can see this. It's freaky. Don't take my word for it. Look it up. Go to Bitter Winter. Go to websites that have stories on this. They're bringing back party worship. You have golden statues of Mao Zedong in these temples, and that during the virus lockdowns is one of the only forms of worship that has been allowed. You can go and worship the Chinese Communist Party. That is the religion that's allowed right now in China. All right, folks, it's getting quite late, so I'm going to call it a night. And out here visiting family, so yeah, I'm going to call it a night. But again, I'm doing these live Q&As Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. So tune in again, folks. Also, I'm going to be in Florida at CPAC. I'm going to be doing some reporting there, doing interviews. I'm also scheduled to speak on a panel about China. So if you're there, be sure to check it out. Also, folks, I have a few updates. Remember, we're talking about doing a special series on communism, explain the origins of communism. We're making a lot of progress on that. Hopefully, we'll have something to show you within maybe a month-ish. Maybe 2 months on that, might be a little bit, but we'll have to see. Try to get it done quickly. I'm also going to be working on similar special features that I think are hopefully going to have a long-lasting impact. And I really want to get some information out there that's not commonly known. And so working really hard on this. I'll keep you all updated on the progress. In the meantime, folks, again, check out the interviews we do. I'm doing a lot of interviews. Some really good ones coming up soon. We're getting Kevin Sorbo hopefully this Wednesday. He's confirmed. Hopefully it'll come through. We had just recently an interview with this pastor, Pastor Cheon, who was the one who won the Supreme Court battle in California, making it so that churches could stay open. Talking to him about how his family was persecuted in North Korea. Really incredible story. I have some cool episodes. I interviewed the guy who made the space capsule for the Red Bull space jump and kind of the whole story about American innovation and what the real heart of that is. Be sure to check out our interviews. We have a lot coming out. Also, again, live Q&As Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, with rare exceptions that I'm in transit and I can't make it, but we'll keep you updated on the community page if there's any issues with that. All right, folks, as always, I appreciate your support. If you can, please do still like and please do still do like and subscribe. It really does still help us. I know there's problems with YouTube, but if you can still, please do like and subscribe. It does help us. And again, folks, as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. This has been quite the week, not just for our nation, but for the show as well. Now, as I mentioned in a recent episode, we found out the same day as the inauguration that YouTube has completely demonetized us. Now, honestly, it was expected, given the current environment of censorship, but it's also quite the blow to us financially, at least for the time being. It's a difficult time for not just us, but for the nation as a whole. In Washington, 6 in the morning, the sky was still dark. News reports said that the National Guard would be leaving, but even by noon, we still saw them stationed on the streets. And I wondered whether this really will be the new norm for the United States, and whether the nation has reached a stage where every national event going forward will have security like this. Now, it's not just the past few days that have been hard for the country, but the last year especially. We've seen panic around the CCP virus, job losses, an economic nosedive that hit small businesses the hardest. And on top of this, we've seen riots sweep across the country that pitted citizens against the police. We've witnessed a political climate where the people of this country are being held to two different sets of laws. And we saw a difficult election where many serious questions were left unanswered. People are losing faith in the integrity of our systems of justice, in our systems of government, and even in our fellow countrymen. Now, I was reflecting on all this as I walked through Washington. It's been hard for me to watch this country, which I love so much, facing so much turmoil and division,
And it's difficult to watch our rights of freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, and freedom of belief being targeted for attacks. It's hard to watch big businesses and the big corporate media working hand in hand with big government in these attacks. Now, it was while I was thinking about this that a man recognized me on the streets. He greeted me and thanked me for doing the show. I've always enjoyed meeting you all, but it was especially so this time. It reminded me how important independent media is during chaotic times like these. Now, I've always held that truth has the natural power to dispel lies, and so it's natural that those who lie have it in their interest to prevent truth from being spoken. It takes courage in times like these to stand up, as it takes a willingness to face criticism and attacks. But I also understand that taking up this mantle during this time is what myself and others are being asked to do, and I'll do everything I can to not let you down, and to do so calmly and with good reason. Now, I'm a big believer in finding opportunities in adversity. When one door closes, another opens, and I have faith that for those who stand with integrity, goodness will always prevail. The Epoch Times has been publishing for over 20 years, despite the Chinese Communist Party's best efforts to shut us down. They've gone after our funding sources, they've hacked our website, they've set our printers on fire, they've threatened our staff, and used every means they could to discredit us. And despite the world's second largest economy bearing down on us, we've never stopped publishing, and we never plan to do so. Now, you may be wondering how we've managed to survive all these years. Now, put simply, we've managed to survive because of you, because of loyal viewers and readers who support independent media. So thank you, genuinely. We couldn't have done it without you. And with that said, given that YouTube has demonetized us, if you want to support us, please consider donating to us on DonorBox, which you can find linked in the description below. And going forward, I plan to continue presenting an accurate picture of the news, including here in the United States. I also plan to continue my work exposing the subversive programs of the Chinese Communist Party, which I think will only become more serious. And I plan also to help expose the forms that socialism is now taking in this country and around the world, while also helping to keep alive the values and traditions that are now under assault. That said, folks, thank you all for being here, and thank you for your support. And while it's possible we may move to another platform, these current attacks will not stop us from speaking the truth. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.